Our next guest is the executive producer of the NHL Special Events at Rogers Hockey, Joel Darling. Thank you so much for doing this. And we have a special edition because Hugh, who's our producer and graphic designer and does everything creative with this show, is on the podcast episode, which is very exciting. So welcome, Hugh, as well. And Hugh, this is kind of a full circle moment because Joel taught you at Ryerson for graphical design.
That's right. He did indeed. Yeah, it was, I think it would have been my third year, the fall semester of 2018, I believe. I'm in Ryerson RTA's media production program, which also has a sport media kind of like adjacent program. And there was a sports graphics course, and being sports and graphics being, two of my, go-to passions, calling cards and whatnot, I just jumped at the chance, and I had the privilege of meeting Joel, who obviously is a big name in the industry. And it was such a fun course. I really learned a lot. And I really enjoyed how Joel was not only good at explaining how to draw people in with the detail when it comes to design, but also how important a role it plays in the narrative. So yeah, without Joel right here, I don't think I would have accomplished this much, and quite possibly not have had the capabilities to help you produce this podcast. So yeah, hats off to you, Joel.
Well, I certainly appreciate it. I taught that course for one semester and had hoped to teach it again, but I think they went down to one course the following year. But that course, it was sports graphics, as you said. And that's where I really started in the business. When I was at Ryerson, I was a runner over at Hockey Night in Canada over at Maple Leaf Gardens, which kind of morphed into a font coordinator job at CBC Sports. So what I actually did was I worked on Sports Weekend, which was a Saturday anthology sports show. And I think for me, to start my career that way, I was in the control room every Saturday. I did the prep work leading up to each Sports Saturday show, and basically I was in control of all the graphics for the show. And back then, it was, I want to say, the technology was a lot simpler, but basically, you had a picture for every different sport or a logo for different teams and things like that. So, going back to those days, it was great to be in the control room and be right next to the director and the producer and see up close, really all about television production.
Wow. No, thank you for sharing that.
Joel, how would you describe your career entering the sport industry? Why did you want to do what you're doing now?
Well, I think, I grew up, I was born in Ottawa. I grew up in the Buffalo area. My dad was the broadcaster for the Buffalo Sabres for 20-some years as their play-by-play announcer. So as a young kid, first in Ottawa, I would go up to Montreal with him when he worked for Hockey Night in Canada. The odd time he'd take me up there with him. I'd go to the radio station with him on the weekends. And then when we moved to Buffalo, I was at the age of 7 at that point and became a Sabres fan. And before you know it, I was going to as many Sabre games as I could. At first, obviously sitting with my mom, but becoming a bit of a rink rat. As time progressed, I eventually began working upstairs in the press box. And I would do a lot of different things. Back then, broadcasters would receive information on out-of-town scores via a teletype machine. So I literally would take scraps of pieces of paper to different, the visiting TV booth, the visiting radio booth, the home radio, home TV, and put it down in front of them, and that's how they would get the scores back then. I did a lot of things back then as a high school kid, I guess, at the age of 17 or 18. The other thing that I did was I announced the goals, over a small PA system within the press box, because back then at Memorial Auditorium, you couldn't really hear the PA announcer because of the antiquated system or the building itself. And the other thing that I did was I think back then there was 631 steps in Memorial Auditorium, and I went up and down those stairs before the game and each intermission and at the end of the game. And what I would do is I would actually take the stats down to the coach's dressing room, and then I would actually take them over to Punch Imlach, who would sit at the bottom of the Reds in the corner at Memorial Auditorium. So that was my routine of taking stats throughout the night. So I did that for a few years, and that's how and then sat alongside my dad as he broadcast games, helped out with some stats on some nights, and then Hockey Night in Canada came to Buffalo for a few occasions during the playoffs, and that's where I first kind of met a few people at Hockey Night in Canada. So I applied to Ryerson. Actually didn't get into the radio and television program the first chance. And I wasn't sure where I was going to go to school. I actually got accepted to UBC. I was going to go to UBC, and then at the last minute I decided, well, I'm going to go to Ryerson. I'll take a liberal arts program the first year and then try to get into Ryerson the next year. So that's what I did. I basically came up here. In fact, I was telling a story the other night. The first day I came up to Ryerson, because I made the decision very late, I ended up staying at my aunt's house, who lived up at Finch and Bayview. And I'd saved about $1,000 US that summer, put it on a money belt. I got on a bus on Finch to head over to her house. I reached down, the money belt was gone. I'd lost it. Here I was trying to be safe with my money, and I'd actually lost my money. Anyways, that's how I started out. I came to Ryerson, and as luck would have it, there was an opening at Hockey Night in Canada, and I began working there with, Dave Hodge was the host back there. That obviously turned into Ron McLean, and but really I was a rink rat at Maple Leaf Gardens then. I would bring players over for interviews, coaches over for interviews. I'd stop players at 3 stars. I would go over and start the periods with the timekeepers so that in conjunction with television. You would even take beer to the officials. Back then, the officials used to wear a beeper system. So it was actually a little beeper that had a battery in it that you would take to the referees before the game. You test it out. And then I would actually, the TV guys back then, for whatever reason, we used to take beer to the refs so they had something after the game. Maybe it was because of Harold Ballard and how cheap he was, but the referees wouldn't get served anything after the game. So yeah, I really became a rink rat there, and I think I tell many of the students or people that I'm involved in, while at school, I tried to be as busy as I could, doing different things and meeting different people. So I had eventually graduated from Ryerson. I had a few different options, and one was obviously working with CBC, where I eventually went as a graphics coordinator and just kind of went from there as far as my career goes.
Hugh.
Yes, awesome. Thank you. What are some special events at Rogers Hockey that you've been involved in or participated in?
Well, a lot of the ones that I've been involved in now are a lot of the ones that are getting canceled right now. So the last one we would have done would have been the All-Star game this past year in St. Louis. But my main role is planning and executing the outdoor games. In fact, I think yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of the outdoor game in Regina. So it seems hard to believe that a year ago we had a game going on in Regina inside that football stadium. But outdoor games, All-Star game, the draft, free agency, trade deadline. So all those shows that aren't necessarily kind of the day-to-day events that Rogers does on Sportsnet. Now, having said that, with the playoffs these past playoffs, I was heavily involved with that from a studio perspective. The other executive producer was actually out in the bubble in Edmonton for a good chunk of it, so he worried about all the production on site out there, and then I worried about it back here. The other event that I've been heavily involved with in the past is Hockey Day in Canada. We have just we've done 20 Hockey Day in Canadas. I've actually been to each one of them, and that one is a very time-consuming project that really as soon as we finish one, we're starting on the next one a year later. So obviously, again with the pandemic, we won't probably be on site for something in February again, but we're certainly hoping that we'll have a day where all 7 Canadian teams will take place. But that's basically what my role is at the present time, is overseeing some of those special events that aren't really what happens, what you'd see day-to-day game-wise.
I guess you kind of already answered this, Joel, but amidst the pandemic, do you have a kind of new schedule, a new system?
Yeah, well, the way it
shifting
unfolded
from scene
was,
to scene.
yeah, I guess, I mean, when the pandemic happened back in March and games were canceled, the first thing that kind of happened within Sportsnet was, a lot of people started to have some ideas as to what are we going to do? What kind of programming can we do? So right off the bat, I proposed a show with Ron McLean, and it was a show that was called In Conversation. So it was interesting to see how that unfolded, because the first thing that we wanted to do was we wanted to do a show in the studio. So it was the Saturday after all the NHL games had been canceled, and I was in the office and we were working out the studio and working out the set and how we were going to do the show, and working on music and animation and all that kind of stuff, sponsorships, and we bringing people into the studio, and then, as you know, kind of everything kind of crashed that weekend, where we got to the point where it was like, you know what, we can't have people in the studio, we can't be doing this, we can't be bringing guests in. So immediately it kind of went away, and then the next thought was, well, how can we do this show? Is there a way to do it um, not being in the studio? So, as you guys know, like Zoom, like what we're doing right now, obviously this became, the way content was created, in those first few months of the pandemic. And so there were a bunch of growing pains for us, and certainly for the digital group at Sportsnet. We had to learn how to do things a lot differently. How do you access footage? How do you edit footage? How do you do all these things that you normally do inside, your studio space, your edit suites, and things like that. So it was a real learning experience. I had to go over to Ron's house. I live in Oakville here, and Ron doesn't live too far away, and I had to try to figure out how to get him kind of set up from a technical standpoint. Now, I'm not real technical, and Ron certainly isn't. So we had to go through some different growing pains of, how do we set up his computer, the little things within his computer for the quality of the shot. In the end, we ended up sending him some lights. We sent him a microphone. I found myself running to different Staples all over Toronto trying to find, little, pieces of equipment to help him with his equipment there. So eventually we were able to do that. But the other thing that was really important from a digital aspect was our digital group, who, this ran on YouTube and ran on Facebook and obviously on sportsnet.ca. There were a lot of things that we just had to figure out that we hadn't done before. So it turned into a process, and over 3 months, I think it was, we did close to 90 guests, that ranged from Peter Mansbridge to Adam Van Koeverden to Connor McDavid. So it was a real interesting way to do content that we had never done before. And I think for, even for Ron, when you think, this happened in March, trying to get ready to do it, we did it right through till about, I think it was through to Canada Day. So we did it April, May, and June. We learned a lot, did a lot of guests, and it was very busy, especially for Ron, who is someone who really would, does thorough research on his guests. And then the other thing that was interesting, we had early on tried to figure out who our guest list would be. And, early on it was like Marnie McLean and Jim Cuddy, somebody from music and somebody from sports. But as the pandemic unfolded, as, racial tensions rose and different, social impacts that we saw unfolded, our guests kind of changed, right? So, I'm really proud of when we look back at, the guests that we did over those 3 months of who they were and how they were able to find a voice, with somebody like Ron to get it out there. So it was an interesting 3 months, learned a lot. And again, as I said, even the digital side of it for Sportsnet, they had a lot of things coming at them that they had to figure out. And much of that content was new, a new way of producing it. So that took us right into into July. Had a couple of weeks off, and before we knew it, around July 25th, 20th, we were in starting to get ready for NHL hockey. So and that went right through till the end of September. So, even as the Stanley Cup was about to be given away, I was throwing some more ideas to my boss, and he called me and said, "Just go away. You've been busy, And a lot of us had been busy. So, at this point, right now, I guess to some degree, we're on holidays, and like many people, anxiously awaiting, some timeline around the game and seeing when it might come back."
Joel, this is a little bit off sport, but I've been watching a show called The Morning Show, and it's about kind of the behind the scenes of how to produce and manage a morning show. And there's this character called Chip, and he's the executive producer of the show. And I'm so fascinated with this character because he's managing a whole bunch of different things for the shows and all these other details. And because you're an executive producer, I wanted to ask you, what is your management style and leadership style to running a team for a show or in your position?
Good question. Yes, I watched the morning show. I think probably early on during the pandemic. It's a fascinating show, and it's fascinating as well because I've been a fan of the Today Show for years, and even watching that show, sometimes I think, boy, those people who are actually on that show or involved in the show, it must be really intriguing for them, let alone us or you and I to watch it. I would say, from my standpoint, the key to any, I think, managing people is communication. I'd like to think that, over the course of my career, that the real important things that I've always found is that you need to be able to provide as much information to people who work for you, as well as who you work for. Right? I mean, from managing up, I never would want anybody to ever be surprised about anything that we've done or thoughts that we are going to do. And I think anybody I'm managing is making sure that they have input. That the what we're trying to do is communicated as best possible, and that it's a collaboration of everybody. And especially in this business of television, there's so many people, whether it's a producer or a graphics coordinator, a cameraman, or a director, technical producer. Everybody needs to know and have as much information as possible. And I think the other thing that is really important in this business is being thorough. I guess what I mean by thorough is that more than anything, that you deal with things quickly and right away. I'm not one who likes to have an email sitting there for a few days before I answer it. I think in this business, you have to be quick, you have to be timely, and you have to deal with things as quick as possible. And I think sometimes, people get caught up in it's a commitment for sure. But I think, in order to keep something, whether it's a television show of a broadcast of a hockey game or a golf event or whatever it might be, Olympics, you need to keep that train constantly running, and being able to answer questions quickly and get answers quickly is really important. So that's what I would say is important to me.
I know I could not agree more, Joel. Whenever someone asks me, like, what is my ideal working environment, I always say, well, what I do is I'm there to do my job, but also help others do theirs. Like, that's basically, I think, kind of maybe the key ingredient. Like, everyone doesn't just do their job; they help each other do one another's. And at a time like this where communication is like all the more essential, but at the same time all the more difficult, people have to realize that the entire workflow and the entire success of the outcome is like highly dependent on how everybody interacts and communicates with one another. So yeah, what are your thoughts on like the broadcasting industry becoming kind of more and more digital, with viewers having access online and remote platforms? Do you feel like it's something that we could kind of adapt to as kind of like the new norm, or do you feel it's sort of it should only stay a temporary thing and things should go back to normal like as soon as possible?
Well, I think that's a good question. I mean, I think what, if anything, over the last few months, we've learned a lot about what we can do, from a technological standpoint that we never thought we could do before, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I think of what we did within Conversation with Ron and all the content that we did produce, considering that we did it at home, without studios, without expensive control rooms and things like that, it was some pretty riveting content of some of the things that we did do. So, I think it will change some things down the road for sure. I think it does allow more voices out there. I think, we've all seen YouTube stars, and this is even before the pandemic, who have risen to popularity over things that they've done that you never would have, thought could happen years ago. But I mean, even just it's going to change the business, even in people working at home like editors, right? An editor now, who maybe didn't think he could sit at home and do work on a laptop as opposed to a big edit system, within CBC building or the Sportsnet building or something like that. But in the end, I think what it ultimately does, it allows for more creativity and more content that is out there than ever. The problem is for all of us is to figure out, what content do we want to see, and how do we decide, what we really want to get interested in? Because you guys know as well as I do, there's content you might see on social media and, 10 seconds into it, you're not interested, right? But there are things out there that, that are now available to us that haven't before. So I think, we're, strictly from the NHL and the television side, we have always had discussions and have done some work around what we call REMIs, which are basically remote television productions. So some of the junior games that take place on Sportsnet over the course of the last few years have been done where the cameras are at the rink. There's a technical crew there, but the producer and director are back at a Sportsnet studio in Toronto, and they're actually calling the game or directing and producing the game from Toronto. So, and again, we saw some other things during the bubble where, or during the NHL when teams were in the bubble where, some of these teams are calling the games off radio from back home and they're watching it on TV. Even the Bills, I know the Bills announcer John Murphy in Buffalo quite well, and I saw a picture of their set up the other day. They were calling the game from Rich Stadium, watching the game on TV, not Rich Stadium, whatever they call it now. I guess it's not New Era Field, but Buffalo Bills Stadium. But they're calling the game from there. So I wonder how that's going to affect technology down the road. Like, will radio stations maybe not take commentator teams to games because of costs? I hope they will. There obviously is something to have commentators inside the building to call it, but there are a lot of things like that will be looked at, because let's face it, doing a radio broadcast or a television broadcast, it's very expensive, and rights fees have gone up, making it very complicated to do those things. So it will create other options for broadcasters that weren't there before. And that's just because out of necessity, right? Things that have happened over the last few months that we haven't even thought of or haven't been able to do. And now, again, I'll use the Bills as an example. When the season starts next year and if the pandemic's over, are they going to say, well, our football rights are too high? We're just going to do it the way we did, where we'll keep you back here and call it off too. People don't necessarily notice it. Although, I don't know if you guys were a couple of weeks ago, and I'm a Bills fan, so I was watching, but the Bills game was taking place in Miami a few weeks ago, and there was a power outage in the stadium. So, John Murphy calling the game back at Rich Stadium lost his feet and left him and his analyst to kind of talk really with no pictures until they were able to fix that. But it's interesting. Like I said, out of necessity, a lot of new things have come to us or have happened and have created different ways to do content, and we'll see how that affects what direction people go in the future.
Joe, we had Paul Henrik on a few episodes ago, and he was talking about how consumers of sport, they want content to be in small clips, so 3 minutes, 4-minute clips, highlights for NHL games. What are your thoughts about this clip culture that's kind of coming into the fold of media?
Well, I would say, it's good and bad. Let's talk about the good. I didn't watch the baseball game on Saturday night, with that last inning play, but I certainly saw it on social media after the fact. So for me, ultimately, it was great. I was able to catch that, and I saw the play from a few different angles. Saw the excitement, saw the wildness of it. I don't know if I would have sat and watched 3.5 minute highlight pack, but I think everybody's different. There are people who might be watching social media and say, "Well, there's a Connor McDavid scored the winning goal," and I can go to NHL.com and watch just that winning goal if I want to. I know how to find it. Um, so I think from somebody who wants to get content from my end, I think there's different ways, that I can find things that I want. It's just like people say, how you want it, when you want it, and where you want it. So I think the good thing about it is there's lots of different varieties, because if I wanted to go back and watch the whole game again, I could watch it, or I could watch a 3-minute clip, or if I thought I just want to watch that last inning, I could find a place to watch that last inning. So I certainly think, that you're serving the consumer, and why not make it as available to them as many ways as possible. And as you guys know too, you find your places that you go to for your content, right? If something happened in hockey and I want to hear, Elliot and Jeff talk about it on 31 Thoughts, I'll go there. Or maybe something's happened on Spit and Chicklets, right? My son, who listens to that religiously, might say, you got to listen to this at the 28-minute mark. And I can go to the 28-minute mark and listen to it right then, right? So I think it's fantastic for people that you're able to access anything that's happened, after the fact.
That was a great answer, Joel. And Hugh, you want to take the last question here?
Sure. What would be the most memorable moment for you thus far working in the sport industry?
Yeah, boy, I was thinking about this earlier. I would say I don't think I could pick one particular one, but I would say there's a few that are kind of television wise, and few that I happen to be kind of at an event, because I was there because of my job. So, from a television standpoint, probably going back to 2002, I was the executive producer of the Olympics for Salt Lake City, and one of the senior producers had gotten sick. So I actually sat in and, was actually producing, our broadcast, our feed of the gold medal in Salt Lake City, which, was the first time they'd won it in 50 years. And I think it was a 10 million audience in Canada, one of the highest ever. But that one really probably is right. A really big highlight, for sure. Outside of that, there's little things that I remember. I did a lot of IndyCar racing and Formula One early on in my career, and I still to this day don't think there's anything kind of more exciting, more adrenaline that I've ever gotten from being on the starting grid of an IndyCar race when they start the engines. It's just like I had the chance to do that a few times, and it's just unbelievably thrilling, because it's not only the sound and the crowd and the celebrity drivers and things like that, but just the smell of the gasoline or ethanol or whatever it is. So that's something that I remember. It still sticks out. I've had a chance to do a lot of Stanley Cups, Grey Cups, obviously Olympics and things like that. I was in the stands the night that the Canadian team won the 4x100 relay in Atlanta. Don Whitman making that call. That was really special. And also in 2006, I saw the women win the gold medal in Torino in ice hockey. So that was pretty cool. But probably the best thing that I remember off the ice was off the ice, away from kind of the control room, was the Commonwealth Games in 1990 in New Zealand. We were there for CBC Sports, and it was in Auckland. And I decided one night, and it was early on in my career, I was doing a bunch of different sports, including boxing. So one night I didn't have any edit time, so to speak. So the executive producer says, "Why don't you go over and watch some of the boxing?" So I did go over and watch some of the boxing. Can't remember who the what his name was, other than the guy's name who won. His first name was Danny. He was from Ireland, and he had won a fight that he wasn't supposed to win, and it's probably one of the first real sporting events I had been to at a games. Although I had done the Olympics in '88, but again, this was the Commonwealth Games. So this boxer from Ireland had a big upset. He won the match. They went to play the national anthem and to provide him with his medal, and they couldn't get the cassette. Back then, they used a cassette to play the anthem, and so somebody called up. It might have even been his mother or his dad, or his dad. I think it was. It came up, and he sang "Oh Danny Boy," and I'll never forget that as long as I live. I mean, it was just so surreal just to watch this kid who had just won a boxing match in Auckland, New Zealand. He's from Ireland. You know, the sound system didn't work for whatever reason. His dad got up and sang "Oh Danny Boy," and it just gave me shivers. So, sometimes it's not necessarily, the heat of the moment of being in a TV control room. It's just kind of what happens, when you don't expect it. But I've been lucky enough to be a part of a lot of great events over the years, and as I said, it's hard to probably pick out one.
Joel, I have a question for you, and it's kind of off the board, but I think you have a great answer for this. What would you tell people right now that have lost jobs because of COVID in the sport industry, or future sport industry professionals that are trying to get into the industry? What advice would you give them?
Well, I think I would say follow your passion. Follow what you really have in your heart that you want to do. I've got a couple of 24-year-olds. The twins. I have a 17-year-old as well, and one of the twins, 24, is kind of going through that where he's lost his job and now he's trying to figure out, what he wants to do because he loved what he was doing. And I think, as I've told him, what do you want to do? What do you feel that, you want to do? What do you want to do in your heart? What do you love to do? I've been lucky enough to be involved in sports television, my whole life really. And it's never been a dull moment. I feel that I'm really lucky that I never got on the GO train to go to work or got on an airplane or got in the car to head to work, even in the dead of winter in the middle of the night, and thought, "Oh my God, I got to go to work today." I've been really lucky that I've always enjoyed going to do whatever the job might be, whatever sporting event it might be, even if it was just a day to go into the office. And I think that's because I love sport, I love television, and I love the people that I have been able to work with over the years. So I think you got to follow your heart, you got to follow your passion, you got to find something that you really love to do, because life's too short, and if you're going to be working, you're going to be trying to provide for yourself and your family for years to come. So do your best at finding something that you really love to do, and then as they say, you'll never work another day in your life. So it's been tough. I certainly know it, and again, seeing my son go through it, it's been tough for a lot of people. But the pandemic, it is a pandemic, and it's unlike anything that we've ever seen or what we're going through. So things will get back to normal. It's just a matter of when, and hopefully, when that happens, I hope there's a lot of things that have happened through the pandemic that will, open up a lot of different opportunities that may have not been there before. And I think it will. Again, as much as it's been tough on a lot of people, there's been a lot of learning, a lot of different ways in this business to provide, content in a different way. And I think, if anything, somebody who might be involved in sports television or sports management, what we all can see is how important sports is to people, and watching sports, watching live sports, attending sports is really important to the health of people. So I'd like to think that we're all, however we touch sports in some way, television and things like that, that there's going to be some more opportunities, and then better days are ahead.
Hugh, is there anything else that you would like to ask?
This is the closing finale, man. Like, come on, go out with a bang. I really appreciate the input on that, Joel, because me, among other people, along lots of people, obviously, are in that same boat of being kind of like out of a job or in between jobs because of COVID. But yeah, just my kind of take on that is what you said, and like just build your CV the best you can. Like obviously, Vince and I are staying productive with this project among others. And even if it's not, professional experience, it's still, experience nonetheless. We're still learning a lot. And yeah, in terms of like just seize whatever opportunities out there. Like even if yes, it might just be, it might just be a temporary thing because obviously your go-to passion may be out of your reach because of COVID. But like you said, like just give it some time, be patient, and yeah, there's there's always something you can do to like keep living.
Yeah, and don't be afraid. I would say don't be afraid to explore different ideas. I mean, I know Hugh from having you in class at Ryerson, like you were doing some things, some really high end things that blew me out of the water back then. That while you were in university, and I think I always felt when I was in school, and I tell many of my students is, have a resume when you walk out of school, right? Don't be afraid to pick up the phone to call people. Don't be afraid to ask to come and watch. I often tell a lot of my students to say that, pick up the phone and ask, come in, just not to come in that you want a job, but you want to see what happens behind the scenes. And I think you'll find that there's a lot of people in the business who, have gone through, their own, their own road to get where they are. And there's not one person out there who's in a role that they haven't had some help along the way. So whoever's out there looking for work, don't be afraid to pick up the phone and don't be afraid to ask. The most they could say is no. And I think you'll find in most cases, a lot of people are very open to, passing on some learning and allowing people a chance to see what they're doing. So yeah, it's better days ahead. Let's hope.
Couldn't agree more with you, Hugh. Couldn't agree more with you, Joel. Thank you so much, Joel, for doing this. We really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing your great insight with us. I'm very fascinated just from listening to you. It kind of blew me away. So it's really cool. So thank you, Joel, very much.
All right, thanks, guys. You're welcome. Take care.